they didn't set her up on a drip, and I asked them, well, how is she going to eat? Why aren't we setting up a drip for her? Why? And it was then that they tried to break it as gently to me as they could, and they said to him, there's nothing more we can do. It's just a matter of waiting.
Timothy from Malaysia served at a children's ministry in New York when he first met Sarah from Northern Ireland.
You know, I just thought she was cute. But as we got to know each other, I mean, I saw this amazing heart for God and for kids. She was a very bubbly person. Had a twinkle in her eye. She had this lovely, enchanting Northern Irish lilt, beautiful blue eyes, and she had this 10,000 megawatt smile that would just, brighten up the room.
As their friendship grew closer, they both felt that this was from God. They were meant to journey together. So, one day,
I blindfolded her, I took off her shoes, and I took off her socks. And when she opened her eyes, I had this bowl of water, and just with like rose petals in it. And I started washing her feet. And I proposed to her, and I asked her if she would marry me. And I promised that I would lay down my life for her, the same way Jesus laid down his life for his church. And thankfully she said yes. So we got engaged, I guess you could say on the 1st of January, 2012.
Following their engagement, they decided to get married in Sarah's native country, Northern Ireland. The plan was to part ways for a year and save money for their wedding in November 2012. So they bid their goodbyes, and Tim flew to Malaysia, while Sarah returned to Northern Ireland to work as a primary school teacher. Then one evening, Timothy received an unexpected phone call from Sarah's brother-in-law.
And I was surprised to get his phone call, but when I picked up the call, he just told me that Sarah had been admitted to the hospital, but that she was fine and that she was stable, but that she had been sedated. Her family had found her in bed that morning with a seizure.
Hearing the news, Timothy immediately rushed to the UK. Although Sarah was feeling better, the doctors told them something that they had no idea of.
Well, they weren't sure when I first arrived what it was. They suspected that it was swelling on the brain, so they told us it was nothing that they were worried about. Unfortunately, when the scans came back, then they told us that, contrary to what they had said, it was actually a growth, a lump on her brain, and not just swelling.
However, it didn't seem malignant to the doctors, so they said Timothy and Sarah could go ahead with the wedding plans, and that following the wedding, they could operate on her to remove the growth.
So we got married and we prayed about it, and we thought, let's just get it out. Let's move on with our lives. So we got married in November 2012. And then we told the doctors that we wanted to proceed with the surgery. She was put on the waiting list, and in February 2013, she went for surgery, and they removed as much of the lump as they could.
But as they sent it for biopsy, they made a discovery that they weren't expecting.
Unfortunately, it turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. It was a mixed grade tumor, which meant that it was malignant, and which meant that Sarah had to go for further treatment for her brain cancer. And when we were in the doctor's office that day, and when he told us all these things, our hearts sank and our world just came crashing down around us, really. But the first thing that Sarah said was, she looked at me and she asked me, "Tim, how are we going to go back to Malaysia to do ministry now?"
Timothy knew it would not be an easy journey moving forward, but during that time, he remembered the vows he had made to Sarah.
I mean, that's the purpose of marriage, isn't it? Till death do us part. That was what I had promised her when I first proposed to her and washed her feet and said that I would lay down my life for her.
As Sarah started her cancer treatment, her health continued to deteriorate. According to their doctor, she didn't have much time.
He bluntly told us that, look, we're just trying to buy you as much time as we can. He gave her a prognosis of 5 years at most. We refused to believe it. We said we would pray to God and we would plead with God to heal her.
As Sarah's seizures became more frequent, Timothy became her full-time carer, whilst he worked for a bank from home.
When I worked from home on some days, and she would see me behind the computer and she said, Tim, you're wasted in the bank. And I knew she was right, but like I said, needs must. It was a means to an end. And so I just did it. And God really provided that job. I mean, because as Sarah's condition got worse, and as she needed more attention and more care, my managers were really supportive, and they gave me very minimal work to do, and I could just do everything from home, and which meant I could care for her.
Whilst they were going through this turmoil, they found out that Sarah was pregnant. Around the same time, a generous friend offered them a holiday in Europe just to spend quality time together.
Because we never had a proper honeymoon, we went on this trip to Europe. It was only after we came back from Europe, so September 2015, that we discovered that she actually lost the baby. She had a miscarriage. This was when she started to get weaker.
Then one day, during a regular medical visit, the nurse told Timothy and Sarah something they were not ready to hear.
She just said, Tim, I think you both need to consider taking Sarah to a hospice, just so that you can have some form of respite, so you can just focus on being her husband, and so Sarah's mum could just focus on being her mum.
As painful as it was to hear those words, Tim remembered a promise he had made to Sarah.
And this was when things were going quite well. She just turned to me one day and she said, Tim, if God doesn't heal me, I want you to promise me that you won't let me die in a hospice or a hospital. I want to die at home.
Remembering her words, Timothy knew that they would never opt for that. But he also remembered that they had told each other that no matter what, they would never walk away from the Lord. So Timothy asked his wife how her heart was.
She looked at me and she said, my heart's good. And I was really, really relieved. But then I wasn't prepared for what Sarah asked me next, which was obviously the same question. Tim, how is your heart? And I didn't want to lie to her. I couldn't say it was good because it wasn't. And then I remembered, I just thought of a cheesy line, and I just said, Sarah, my heart's still beating, and my heart's still beating for you. She smiled a half smile at me and she said, okay, but what about Jesus? Is your heart still beating for Jesus? I had to really search and ask myself that question before I could finally answer, saying, Sarah, my heart is still beating for you, and it's still beating for Jesus. At which point she smiled and she said, that's good. And that was it. We never talked about the hospice. I finished getting her ready for bed, brought her to bed, told each other we loved each other, and we said goodnight. And 2 days later, she became unconscious.
After 7 days of being unconscious, the doctors knew they couldn't do anything to save Sarah. As time passed, Timothy's prayers started to change.
I said, God, if you're not going to heal her, please just take her home. I don't want to see her suffer anymore. And her family, who were at her bedside at the time, they came looking for me in the kitchen, and they told me that, I think you need to come in. The time is close. So I went in and I sat with Sarah and I held her hand. Told her that if she needed to go, that we released her, but that we loved her. And that I loved her. And that I would never forget her. And we gave her our blessing to go home to the Lord. And I felt her squeeze my hand. And it was the first time during the entire time she was unconscious that I got some physical response from her. I took it as a sign that she heard what we had to say. And I took it as a sign of her saying her goodbyes. And minutes later, moments later, she breathed her last. And she went home to be with the Lord.
As she passed away, God impressed a few things on Timothy's heart.
As my heart was breaking for my bride, the Lord impressed upon me, Tim, I know your heart is breaking for your bride, but just know this, that my heart also breaks for my bride.
Timothy immediately knew the meaning of suffering bride, and he also remembered how Sarah always wanted him to serve in his kingdom. So he left his bank job and went to Argentina to serve with a Christian ministry for a year. After returning to the UK, he came across a job advert at Barnabas Aid.
And I applied for it, not knowing much about the organization, other than what I could read about it from their website. And I know it had to do with a persecuted church. As I went for my interview and I sat there with the directors, and one of the things that the director said to me in that room, in that interview, Barnabas exists to support the persecuted bride, or the suffering bride of Jesus Christ. And it was at that moment that everything came back full circle, and now I recognize the significance as well of what God was impressing upon my heart when he told me that his heart was also breaking for his bride.
Timothy took the job and now serves the suffering church around the world through Barnabas Aid. He still lives in Northern Ireland, and in 2020 he married Angela. Today he is delighted that he gets to do what he is passionate about.
And I now consider it a privilege and an honor to do what we do here at Barnabas, to support the bride of Christ.